Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to Sweden, and we're also going to stick to my home county of Skåne here in the very south of the country. So for this review we have a collaboration beer. Both of the breweries involved in this one have featured on the channel before, and I've had some really nice beers from them over the last little while. The home brewery in this case is known mainly for their big fruity juicy sours, and they're still relatively new to the beer scene, whereas the away brewery is known mainly for their big imperial stouts, and they've been around a little bit longer, but it's only fairly recently as well that their beers became more widely available. But regardless, both great breweries, and it's nice to have a collaboration beer to look at from them today. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head a little bit south of me here in Lund to Malmö, and we're going to have a look at another beer from Elmeleven, and this one is brewed in collaboration with Nerd Brewing. Both of these breweries brew at Lilla Ölfabriken in Rosengård in the city, and as I say, both do some really nice beers. But this one in particular is called Discovery by Reflection. It comes in at 7.5% ABV, so this is the heaviest beer I've had from Elmeleven thus far, but they're describing this one as a fruited Imperial Gose with raspberry, rhubarb and toasted coconut. So I think this one has the potential to be very, very interesting. But yeah, this beer was released as part of the local Småskalig assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden for March of 2021, so I'm reviewing this one a little bit later than I had intended, but I'm sure it still will be very, very nice. But yeah, I always keep an eye out for both of these breweries in the local Småskalig, and it is nice to see that the Malmö beer scene is kicking off a little bit more actually. For a long time there wasn't too much available in Malmö, but now we've got Nerd, we've got Elmeleven, we've got Remmelöv close by as well. There's lots of really interesting things popping up in Skåne these days, which is great. We've always had a good scene in Helsingborg right enough as well, with brewski and things like that. But yeah, always nice to return to both of these breweries, and as I say, I hope you guys enjoy my take on this one. So let's go for it. So as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the breweries involved here before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery websites, the link to my other reviews that I've done, both from Elmeleven and from Nerd Brewing, and you will no doubt see more added to that list, or both of those lists, in the fairly near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Elmeleven first off then, on to my brewery notes. So Elmeleven, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Malmö, and the company was founded by Anders Kvist, who is a very lovely guy. I've met him before. Big red-headed guy with big tattoos and things like that, and you know, always willing to talk about beer. Genuinely a lovely person. So if you see him, talk to him, because he's always game for that. But yeah, so he started his brewing project a few years ago, and he said that he views brewing beer as his sort of artistic expression. But his interest in beer started when his friend bought him a non-industrial lager, as he put it, and he was just blown away. You know, this was what beer could actually be. But soon after this, his girlfriend bought him a cheap beer kit where you could just add water, and he just felt that it must be possible to do it so much better than this, and that was what pushed him into home brewing. So he took part in various competitions and then joined the -1, however you want to call it, brewing collective under the Bishop's Arms and Gustav Adolfs Torg in the middle of the city, and it was there that he sold his first commercial beers. So production was very small until quite recently. Only a few thousand litres, but in more recent times he's been brewing in the Nerd, Chad and Lilla Ölfabriken brewery in Rosengård, and he had several Systembolaget releases throughout 2020. You saw me review a number of these on the channel, but mainly these guys brew IPAs and sour beers. I don't think I've had an IPA from them yet, come to think of it, so we'll need to keep an eye out for those in the future. But Anders says that he wants to keep trying new things and do different styles in the future. But the name Elmeleven obviously is quite unusual. But apparently it's taken from where he lived, which was Almbacksgatan 11. So yeah, it's kind of gone like that. So Alm translates into English as elm, as in the type of tree, and this is just something that stuck with him from his home brewing days, and he went with it. So yeah, as of April 2021, when I'm reviewing this beer for you. These guys have produced around 35 different kinds of beer, and the ones that have gone through Systembolaget so far have all been sour beers, bar the first one, which was a kind of IPL lager type thing, if I remember correctly. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Elmeleven for the moment. These guys are doing some seriously good sour beers, so if you're into the likes of, Morgendagens, Brewski, Duck Pond, breweries like this, then this is a brewery that I would highly recommend that you check out. Their beers are up with those breweries that I've just mentioned there. There's some really good quality sour beers coming out of Elmeleven, so long may that continue. But yeah, great little brewery, and as I say, check out the brewery website in the description below. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about all the different beers that Elmeleven have done. So yeah, on to the away side of things then, although it's not really away because they brew in the same place. But yeah, Nerd Brewing. So again, as I told you earlier, these guys are based in Malmö, and the company was founded by Hannes Gruber and Karen Carlson back in 2015, and this was when they had their premiere at the Malmö Öl and Whiskey Festival. But both of these guys were big beer enthusiasts, and they just wanted to kind of get into the industry. So Hannes had been a home brewer for a long time, and he'd got very good feedback on his beers, and this inspired him to turn professional. He comes from a background in software development, and he takes care of the brewing side of things, whereas Karen was an entrepreneur, and she was a trader within the IT industry, and she was managing the business side of the brewery, although she is no longer involved in the company. But they started out with a very modest production, and they've now become one of the most highly decorated breweries in Sweden, according to Untappd, and it's quite rightly justified based on my previous experiences. But most of the beer is brewed at Lilla Ölfabriken, or Chad Beer, and they have brewed one or two next door to that in South Plains. But the company is now officially joined with Chad Beer and Lilla Ölfabriken, and I think the parent company is called Lilla Ölfabriken, but they all sell their beers under their own brands, if you like. So basically there's the Lilla Ölfabriken parent company there, that is the brewery premises, if you like, and then Nerd, Chad and Lilla Ölfabriken all sell beers under there. I'm not sure if Elmeleven will become more kind of closely associated with that and buy in a little bit later on. I'm not too sure about that, but that would be cool to see actually. But Nerd Brewing, as I've mentioned to you already, brew mainly imperial stouts, although they have released a few IPAs, mainly on tap, although one came out in the can, the Switch, and that was really good. They've done a couple of barley wines as well, and there's been a few other kind of random styles actually as well have come out from this brewery. But for a long period of time, other than festivals around Sweden, it was actually very difficult to get a hold of the Nerd Brewing beers. You had to go over to Denmark and get them in the free market in Copenhagen and things like that. But since 2018, they've been selling their beers in Systembolaget, the state monopoly here in Sweden, and as of April 2021, they've produced around 85 different kinds of beer, and that number will no doubt increase. But yeah, definitely some of the best imperial stouts that you're going to find, and yeah, the barley wine that I had from them in the IPA were also very good. So I certainly look forward to seeing what Hannes does with other styles when he gets round to that in the future. I think he's still working in the IT industry kind of most of the time and doing the brewery kind of on the side, but I think the plan is to eventually transition over fully to the brewery. But yeah, very capable brewer. The other thing we should mention is that they call themselves open source brewing, so you can go on Nerd Brewing's website and get the recipes for pretty much all of the beers, and Hannes always says if there's one that's not there, email him and he'll give you the recipe for that, and you can try brewing it yourself. So I think that's always very cool, and most of the beers are named after you know, different computing and programming things. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Nerd Brewing for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, again, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about all the different beers that they've done. So yeah, let's crack on and have a little look at this beer then. I have to say I'm very curious about this. So as you always get with Elmeleven, it's got this kind of concept, this sort of concept album type artwork on it, this sort of space themed concept thing. There's an awesome band from Stockholm who are just about to release their second album after a huge hiatus. They're called Aroma, and the artwork on these Elmeleven beers really reminds me of the when I first discovered Aroma back in about 2012 or whenever it was. But yeah, the artwork on these beers. It's always beautiful. But there you can see some kind of circuitry and stuff like that, and I think that's obviously a reference to Nerd Brewing. But there you can see Elmeleven with the spaceship symbol, and underneath there is the Nerd Brewing bottle cap one there. But as I told you earlier, this one is called Discovery by Reflection, a fruited Imperial Gose, 7.5% ABV, raspberry, rhubarb and toasted coconut. I think this beer should be really interesting. The heaviest one that I've had so far from Elmeleven, but I don't think that's really going to be an issue. So let's get this guy out, we'll get on with the tasting. Plain black bottle cap on this one, incidentally, and I think I paid maybe about 35 or 40 Swedish kronas for this one. I think this one was a little bit more expensive because of the slightly higher alcohol. So yeah, 40 kroners, €4, about £3. What would that be? About 40 kroners would maybe be about £3.50, something like that, sterling. And then in dollars, you're talking maybe, yeah, about $4.50, maybe nearer $5, maybe $4.75, something like that. So yeah, pretty good price for a big Imperial Sour. There's a wee bit of sediment left in the bottom of this one, so we'll try and get that, because sediment's always good in these Elmeleven beers. But yeah, the other thing I should also add is that this beer, it tells you on the side, this one contains wheat, oats and lactose. So yeah, I think this will be a typically very big creamy sour, as we've had from Elmeleven on numerous occasions before. But yeah, let's have a little look at this then. It looks pretty good. Well, the colour of this one is quite interesting actually. I wonder how much of an influence the rhubarb is having on the colour of this beer. But you can see the head on this one is lovely. That's a solid finger, maybe a finger and a third of a really kind of candied pink sort of head on that. I'm not sure how well that colour shows up on the camera there, but that has a lovely just pink tinge to it, which looks absolutely great. There's one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass there, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head, but overall the appearance of this beer, I don't even know how to describe the colour of that actually. It's almost like a kind of cherry colour, to be honest with you, almost the same colour as like cherry skin or something like this. Yeah, maybe candy, not even candy apple red, it's not bright enough for that. I have no idea what you could compare that to actually. It's the same colour as like cherries. I think that's probably the best descriptor for it, like a kind of cherry juice colour. So remember, when it comes to beers, the colour is dependent on a couple of different things. One, the type of malts that you use. Two, the length of your wort boil. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugar's caramelised, thus you get a darker beer. But also adjuncts and barrel aging also play a role in there, and obviously in big fruity sours like this, the adjuncts, the fruit is obviously going to play a big role in that. But it certainly looks very nice. You can see this beer is haze, haze for days essentially, but when it's got loads of wheat and lactose and oats and stuff in it, that makes sense. The level of haze is dependent on the wheat and the oats, and to a degree the yeast as well. But pardon me, yeah, nothing untoward about this beer when you consider what style it is in terms of its appearance. So yeah, looks pretty good. An Imperial Gose, this one, so I expect a little bit of saltiness in this, which is always nice. But let's take a closer look at the aroma and see how we get on. Oh yeah, that's nice. I love the aromas you get from these kind of beers. As I've told you in previous reviews, I find these big fruity kind of creamy and juicy sours, they're very straight shooting, but they just smell absolutely beautiful. I love these styles of beers. Definitely not the most complex of things, but if they're brewed well, as the Elmeleven ones usually are, then you get such a nice experience out of these ones. So yeah, it's just beautifully done. Yeah, the aroma of this is absolutely lovely. So yeah, where do we start with this one then? So, as usual with these Elmeleven beers, you get that lovely big smooth base to it. You can definitely smell a wee bit of a white bready character in there, but then you get a lot of that kind of petit filou yogurt type thing out of this one. So the yeast and the oats combine in there just to give you this almost kind of yogurty type character, but you get a lovely kind of smoothness and slight sweetness out of the oats, which I really like. I do get a little hint of a kind of sweet Werther's Original type thing with this. You do get a little bit of that. When this beer is slightly stronger than the other ones that we've had from Elmeleven before, it's that's not surprising. So to me, in the middle of the nose, there is a little bit of a slightly sweeter Werther's Original butter candy, brown sugary type thing to this one. But yeah, that mixes quite nicely with the sort of yogurty creaminess that's underneath. But yeah, lovely smooth and thick creamy oats in there. They develop a little bit more sweetness as you go further into the nose, but you can smell that smooth white bready character underneath it. You do get a wee bit of the wheat out of this one as well. If you take the aroma in a little bit more deeply, you will get a little touch of the bitey wheatiness out of this one. You can also smell a little bit of that saltiness from the Gose in there. Remember, these Goses are a German style of beer. It's actually quite, I forget what the name of the original the really old Gose was that I had from Germany recently, but they're actually quite hard. It's quite hard to find original Goses in Germany. Like you get more Goses basically that are, you know, like these big kind of juicy fruity ones from the newer generation of craft breweries. Actually, it's a bit of a shame. Of course, if you know differently and you've got some that you could recommend me, let me know in the comments section below. But yeah, but the aroma of this beer is lovely. It's just got a nice salty edge to it, which I really like, and I think that suits the whole vibe of this beer. Like I say, the malty kind of characteristics of these beers, the malty kind of centres are always pretty straight shooting, but they just give you such a nice kind of experience, if you like. You can definitely smell a bit of that rhubarb in there as well. When you take the aroma in a little bit more deeply, that's when you get the rhubarb. The rhubarb is kind of mixed in with the kind of sort of wheaty and oaty side of the beer, so it really mixes in with that, the kind of smoothness. So yeah, I really like how that side of the beer goes together. One thing that you also have to say about these kinds of beer is Elmeleven don't brew with hops. Actually, there's a new sour beer brewery back home in Scotland called Vault City, and they actually put hops in the beer. They do beers like this. I think it adds a little bit more kind of depth to the flavour, but even with ones like this, I still think you get a little bit of a green component out of them. It's almost a little bit like a placebo effect, because with this beer I get it as well, and I've had it with the others from Elmeleven before. So I personally think that this beer has a little bit of a kind of grassy note to it. It does have a little bit of a grassy kind of zesty thing, and there is a wee touch of floral note in there as well. So it does smell as if there's a little bit of hop in this, but it isn't listed on the ingredients list there, so I don't think there are hops in this beer. But that doesn't matter. I mean, it's still going to taste pretty nice. I know. I'm pretty confident of that with Elmeleven. But yeah, there's definitely a wee green component to this one for me. Maybe it's placebo, but who knows. I get a little bit of floral character and a good little bit of grassy zestiness out of this one. Usually in the traditional beers, what they would do is they'd use a low alpha acid hop such as Hallertau or Tittnanger, so that it doesn't take away from the sourness, and you know, it would just, again, it just adds a little bit of depth to the beer. But usually they let those hops kind of age a little bit, so the potency goes down even further. But yeah, you do get a little bit of green component out of this one. But yeah, on the fruity side of things, it is, you know, it's the raspberries all the way. You know, it's I feel to an extent with these beers that I'm always kind of just telling you, oh yeah, there's raspberry in there. It's a raspberry sour, obviously. But you do get a few other undertones of things in there as well. There's a little bit of a kind of candied sort of strawberry note for me. There's a little bit of a kind of figgy element to it as well. You will get a few little kind of fruity complexities out of this one. A little bit of a blackcurranty figgy kind of note, and a bit of a candied strawberry as well. But then the sharpness is coming all from the raspberries. The raspberries are the one in this that really give you the big, the sort of big sharpness and zippiness out of the beer, I think we should say. But yeah, I always find the Swedish raspberries are a little bit juicier than the Scottish ones. The Scottish ones are really like slightly puckering. But yeah, the aroma of this beer gives you everything that you would want from an Imperial Gose and everything you would expect from an Elmeleven beer as well. So yeah, take a little bit of time to ponder over the aroma of this one, but I think it's about time for us to get stuck into this one. So this one is called Discovery by Reflection, a 7.5% Imperial Gose with raspberries, rhubarb and toasted coconut, I believe it is. Or maybe regular coconut, I can't remember, from Elmeleven and Nerd Brewing, both based in Rosengård and Malmö. Let's get stuck into this one. That's a good point, actually. I didn't get too much of coconut out of the beer here, but let's get stuck into this one. Slange, skål, cheers. Ooh, that is nice. I tell you something, this beer, compared to the other ones that I've had from Elmeleven before, and I realise I keep referring to Elmeleven when I in this review and not saying so much about Nerd, but that's just because this beer is Elmeleven's domain. This is their domain, these big fruity juicy sours. That's what Elmeleven do. Nerd are all about the stouts, so you know, if it was the other way around, I'd probably be referring to Nerd all the time, but I hope I don't offend Hannes with that. But yeah, this is another lovely beer, but the thing you notice with it right away is just it's even thicker, but it's also got a nice kind of, it's also got a little bit more slickness to it as well, which is kind of interesting, but we'll come to the mouthfeel a bit later on. But you know, this is typically well executed from Elmeleven. I think it's awesome. I always like having a bit of Elmeleven to give me my sour fix every month. But yeah, again, it's like I said, remarkably straight shooting, but you know, it's just really well executed. That's what I like about these big fruity sour beers. So yeah, another solid beer. Thumbs up to both Elmeleven and Nerd Brewing for this once again. But yeah, let's try and break down the flavour then. I mean, straight away with this beer, you can feel a little bit of a smooth, white bready quality there, but on top of that, it actually almost becomes a little bit woody. It's almost got a really kind of smooth, woody element to it, but that's the lactose that's going to give you that. This beer feels very, very slick in the middle third of your palate. It almost feels as if it's got a little bit of a kind of vanilla element to it as well. So yeah, the base of the beer is sort of smooth and kind of white bready. Then on top of that, you get this kind of slickness, which is the lactose. But if you move into that front half of the middle third of your tongue, that's where you get a little bit of a slightly vanilla flavour, but you also get the nice kind of coconutty elements to it as well. So yeah, you do get the coconut and the flavour. I don't think so much of it comes out in the aroma. I think the other things are kind of suppressing it a little bit, but the coconut definitely comes out in the flavour, which I really like. So yeah. But this beer really, really does feel, you know, crazily slick compared to compared to some of the other beers that I've had from Elmeleven before. But I like it. I'd love to see a few more Imperial Goses from these guys if this is what they're like. It's very, very nice. But yeah, what you'll notice is that in the middle of your palate, you've almost got like a kind of circle there, and that's when you get that nice brown sugary, that's when you get that nice kind of brown sugary Werther's Original type note out of this one. It's maybe not quite as sweet as that, as being full on butter candy, but I do think there is a little touch of a kind of butter candy type flavour in the very centre of your palate there, and that just sits on top of that lovely kind of big oaty smooth slickness that the beer has. Yeah, it actually surprises me that this beer isn't. That really surprised me about this beer, just how slick the middle third of your palate is. I would have thought it would have been even thicker than some of the other ones that we've had from Elmeleven before. So that's a really interesting point about this. Yeah, don't know quite what to make of that, but it certainly works. So yeah. The other thing is, it could be just that my palate is kind of adjusting to these beers now, and I don't find them as thick as I used to. Your palate's constantly changing, of course, when you're drinking different stuff. But the other thing you're going to notice is that on the back half of that middle third of your palate, that's when you get the saltiness. The Gose is always going to give you a little bit of saltiness, and you can just feel that. It's almost, if you go to that border region between kind of middle third and back third of your palate, you can feel there's a little bit of a slightly more kind of bready build up in there, and a wee tiny touch of a bread crusty element to it, but the saltiness just sits slightly in front of that into the middle third of your palate there, and that lingers the further into the aftertaste that you go. But you get the coconut coming out, that slightly vanilla-y type flavour as well, and the smoothness of the lactose. So yeah, that works really nicely. If you go onto the back third of your palate, you can feel a little bit of the wheaty character coming out of this one, and the wheat that you get out of this is of course very, very smooth. You do get the tiniest of bitey characters off it at the very back of your tongue, but I mean that's very, very minimal. But on top of that wheaty note on the back third of your palate, you can feel there's a slightly kind of taller flavour, if you like, a nice kind of airy sort of thing. And that's where the sort of airiness of the yeasty qualities come out of this beer. And personally, I think that sort of aids the slickness of the beer in the middle of the palate a little bit, because it does feel quite tall. The sort of airiness of the beer feels quite tall in the back third of your palate with those yeasty elements to it. So yeah, I really like that about this beer for sure. So the thickness of the beer, if you start from the back of the palate and go forward, it's like this, and then it just, as you reach that middle third of your palate, the border region, it just goes like that, and then it gives you a really slick layer in the middle third of your palate there. But yeah, I do get one or two woody sort of flavours emerging out of this one the further you go into the aftertaste, but that mixes with the whole coconut vanilla type vibe that this beer has. But yeah, I'm just going to say this is a beautifully executed beer, so thumbs up again to both breweries. I think they've done a really, really good job here, but that's, to be honest, I would expect that from these breweries, definitely. But yeah, on the edges of the palate then, to where the hoppy part of the beer should be, in the back corners of the palate, you know, there's a little bit of placebo giving me a tiny bit of earthiness, but you know, the sides of your palate in this are very, very smooth, and that's usually an indication that there aren't actually hops in the beer. But it's very smooth along the sides of the palate, but as you reach the kind of front corners of the palate, I do get just a little placebo type, floral type kind of note out of this one. There is a little bit of that kind of placebo effect going on with this beer for sure, but round the front curve of the palate, it definitely has a little bit of a sort of grassy, almost zesty type thing to it there, and I think that works really well. I would love to see Elmeleven do one of these beers just with, you know, a Hallertau or a Tettnanger or something, and just see how it affects the flavour. You know, one of their earlier beers, release you know, a slightly hopped version of it, and just see what that actually does to it. Because I think just using a bit of Hallertau or a bit of Tettnanger or something like that, it could be a really interesting twist on these beers. But you might take away a bit from the creaminess in that sense if you do. So yeah, kind of an interesting idea. But yeah, let's focus on the front third of your palate. As I always say to you, the front third of your palate is where you get the fruity side out of the beer. And remember, whenever you add fruits into a beer as adjuncts, they usually suppress a little bit of the green side of your beer, of the kind of bitterness that you get around the edge of the palate. But yeah. So yeah, the front third of your palate then, on that border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again you get a little bit of that doughier kind of note out of it. You can feel that the bread's is just a little bit thicker, and there's a wee kind of bread crusty element there. But on the front third of your palate, underneath that, there's a lovely kind of smooth, oaty element to it as well. So yeah, there's a lovely kind of smooth, just oatiness underneath the fruity part of this beer, which I really like. But then again, you get a little bit of the grassy, sort of zesty type flavour at the front of the palate. On top of that though, you're getting that nice, juicy, fruity character there. The sharpness of the raspberry really comes out on the kind of front tip of your tongue, and you can feel some of that juiciness and slight sharpness around, you know, just following the front curve of your palate around. But yeah, you get a little oily, juicy character of raspberry on the front there. But if you go towards the back of that, the back of the front third of your palate, it goes, it works. It really does work. On the kind of juicy, fruity side of things, I mean, as I said earlier, in the aroma you get little hints of like a candied strawberry and figgy notes and things like that. You definitely get that here. You do, underneath the front third of your palate, you do get a little bit of that kind of yogurty kind of thing coming out of the beer, definitely. But yeah, you can feel elements of like a figgy element in there, a sort of candied strawberry, and you know, a little touch of an almost black, slightly black curranty element on as towards the front, on the front half of that front third of your tongue. But yeah, the raspberry is really sitting on top of that, and the intensity of the raspberry flavours, the epicenter, if you like, is on that front half of the front third of the palate. So the fruits in the back half of the front third of your palate are a little bit lighter in my mind, and yeah, figs. You know, figs, candied strawberry, and a little bit of an almost curranty type flavour to it as well. But yeah, this is a lovely, lovely beer, this one. As always with Elmeleven, it doesn't have a crazy kind of impact, like a big, you know, pucker and sourness when you take it in. But yeah, it's just got a nice juiciness to it. And you know, for me, a good sour is all about the transition of flavour, and this one kind of creams up and gives you a lot of smoothness really, really nicely. So yeah, this is another beautifully executed beer from Elmeleven and Nerd, and the slight saltiness that you get out of it as well just gives you that indication, yes, this is a Gose. So I do like that about this one. Thumbs up to both the breweries again. But yeah, I think that summarises the flavour quite nicely, to be honest with you. Let's just round off with the mouthfeel then. So yeah, I would say that this beer, it's kind of bottom end to full bodied for me. It's kind of top end to mid bodied, bottom end to full bodied. Very, very creamy beer though. As I say, the carbonation is very, very smooth in this one. It's got a nice little touch of thickness to it, which I think is great. But yeah, as I say, this beer, compared to what I thought it was going to be, it's a lot slicker than I had anticipated, to be honest with you. And I'm surprised about that when you consider how thick some of the other Elmeleven beers are, and the fact that this one is higher in alcohol. But yeah, it certainly works very, very well. I wonder if that means they've focused more on the barley malt in this one and kept the sort of amount of wheat and oat roughly the same. And obviously the lactose is going to play a role in giving you a bit of slickness in the beer too. But yeah, interesting to think about. But in terms of bitterness and IBUs and things like that, you know, this beer, I think technically speaking, will be a 0 IBU beer, but in reality it's going to have, you know, somewhere between 5 and 10 IBUs, something like that. The malty side of the beer and the adjuncty side of things is really lovely and very, very smooth. You do get a degree of sweetness out of it. You get a bit of that kind of yogurty note, like I said, a bit of a almost vanilla and coconutty element to it, and the wood that you do get a little bit of a woody flavour to this one too. So the centre of the palate here is really nice. It's got a little bit of the saltiness that you expect from a Gose as well. Yeah, the fruity, the sort of fruity side of the beer, it gives you a little bit of sharpness in the beginning, but it really juices up quite nicely, and then you've got all these other little fruity subtleties underneath too. But yeah, it's another beautifully executed beer, as I've repeated a few times in the video now, so I don't think we need to say too much more about that. It's everything you'd expect from an Elmeleven beer, slightly slicker, which is surprising because of the alcohol, but really nicely done. And of course, when you've got Elmeleven and Nerd involved in a brew together, you're going to get a good quality beer. So yeah, very nicely executed, this one. I like the subtleties that it has. The rhubarb kind of sits in there with this one as well. I think I even forgot to mention the rhubarb. I think the rhubarb's interesting because it sort of sits there, and I think the rhubarb takes a little bit of time to come out for sure, because I didn't notice it in the beginning, but the rhubarb kind of sits there in the aftertaste, and you can feel that just sitting in the centre of your palate, and it's almost giving you that woody type vibe to it as well. So the rhubarb is nicely executed in this as well. But yeah, just another solid beer from Elmeleven in my mind, and Nerd Brewing. So we can leave it there. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section. Let me know what your favourite beers are, both from Elmeleven and from Nerd Brewing. We will no doubt return to these guys at some point very soon. I'm sure I've got another Elmeleven beer coming for the April lot, and you know, Nerd Brewing, I'm sure I'll have more stuff from them at some point fairly soon as well. I need to have a look at their barrel aged stuff as well, actually. But yeah, thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, and I will see you guys in the next review. This one was the Discovery by Reflection, a 7.5% Imperial Gose from Elmeleven and Nerd Brewing, both in Malmö, with raspberries, rhubarb and coconut in the brew, and all of those come out quite nicely. The rhubarb later in the aftertaste though. Slange, skull, cheers, and catch you guys in the next review.